1. I grew up next door to a cemetery in a small town. The cemetery is very old, but people are still being buried there. There were definitely a lot of strange and unexplainable things that happened to us. My parents worked until 6 p.m., so my brother and I would get off the school bus between 3:30, and would be home alone. Every day we'd get off the bus. We'd wait until the bus left, and just stand at the end of the driveway. If it was quiet, we'd casually walk into our house and go about our routines. On other days, we'd hear voices coming from our backyard. It sounded like children laughing and playing. But there were no other houses nearby with kids. Our house was surrounded by cornfields and the cemetery next door. It always made us feel uneasy and nervous. My little brother would act like it didn't bother him, but I knew he felt it too. We stopped checking the yard for children and just ran inside after a while. There were no kids in the yard. It just sounded like it, almost every afternoon. My brother's night terrors were getting worse. His screams would wake us all up in a panic, thinking someone was hurt or worse. I asked him one day if he remembered what he dreamt about. He told me that he'd scream just so he could move. He'd be paralyzed facing his closet, where his clothes would turn into bodies hanging from nooses. Always the same people, just hanging there and looking at him. Another terror he had. A man would appear at his bedroom door, walk to the window across the room, and stand there before slowly vanishing. The man would reappear at the door and continue his cycle until my brother would scream himself out of it. Years later, I remember coming home late one night. My parents were out and my brother had all the lights on in the house, the TV on, music on, everything. I found him on the floor trembling and crying. After I calmed him down, he told me there was something in the basement. I looked over and he had the door blocked with one of our dining room chairs. I told him to stay there, I'll check it out. I moved the chair. I opened the door and looked down the stairs, and I saw it too. At the bottom of the stairs. I was able to muster up a, "Who is that?" or something like that, and her head flipped, and I mean it flipped up. It was not a human movement, and I didn't stand there long enough to get a good look at her face. I grabbed my brother and told him to get in my car. We left and didn't come home until we knew our parents were home. We never saw that one again, but she has stuck with me. There's so much more. But who has time to read all that, eh? My brother has blocked out everything that happened. He won't talk about our childhood ghosts. I learned later on that the cemetery is having issues with new burials. The bodies have been shifting underground, and the maps the town has are inaccurate. When they go to dig up a plot, sometimes there's already someone buried there. For a jest, I looked up my parents' house on Google Maps, and our driveway sits right over the cemetery, according to the map. 2. Most nights for the past 2 weeks, I have been woken once a night at various times, but most frequently between 3:20 and 3:30 a.m., by 3 loud, tinny music box-sounding notes. It gets my heart racing each time. I don't own a music box. I've turned off electronic devices. I've pulled out my bed and furniture and looked for anything that could be making this sound, but I can't find any answers. I've posted on my Facebook wall when it first started happening, and we all concluded that it must be some kind of auditory hallucination happening when I was half asleep. But the other night, I was having trouble sleeping and was wide awake for over an hour, tapping away on my phone, and I heard it loud while I was completely awake and alert. And it just happened again tonight while I was awake too. I was trying to think why the 3 notes were familiar, and I think it's the go-to-sleep notes from Brahms' Lullaby. Which is ironic. If it's a ghost, it has a sense of humor. The last 2 nights, I've had a smart recorder app on my phone. The kind that only records if it picks up noise. But it didn't happen. I wasn't woken and nothing on the recording. Absolutely kicking myself for forgetting to turn the app on tonight. We'll keep trying. Not the first time weird things have happened in this cottage. Soon after moving in, a year and a half ago, the lights in my room would randomly switch on and off. At first, I put it down to an electrical fault, but it was odd that it only ever happened at night, waking us up once we were asleep. Daughter often sleeps in my bed. Then, after a few weeks, it just stopped on its own. Also had a few literal bumps in the night, loud and sudden, which we initially thought the reason was perhaps the cat knocking something over, but later realized the cat is outside, etc. My elderly neighbor is convinced her place is haunted and has some wild stories that can't be explained, unless she's either going senile, she seems sharp as a tack from our conversations, or someone has been breaking in and playing tricks on her. She said the site where we live was originally a nunnery, then a convent school for a time, and then a hospital, before being converted to accommodation. I'm usually highly logical and skeptical of paranormal stuff, but starting to feel a bit freaked and exhausted. Any thoughts or advice? 3. Around 2005, right after college, I moved back to my hometown, San Diego. A lot of my friends still lived there, so it was a super easy transition. It was also super easy to find friends to go ghost hunting with, as we all loved getting creeped out. I'm from Chula Vista, so the legend of the Proctor Valley Monster was nothing new. It's a folkloric story about a few different tropes. A woman in white roaming the desolate road, a phantom car that comes up behind you at high speeds, just to disappear right behind you. Our version of Sasquatch called the Zoobies roaming the land, and even UFO sightings. It was a hodgepodge of paranormal activity. Mostly, it was a 2-lane state bypass road that ran for a few miles between Chula Vista and Hamishaw that essentially was a service road for airport antennas. But it was also right next to a school, and for decades development didn't make it out there, so it was a ripe setting for teens drinking and ghost stories. One day, my friend Sal and I decided to drive to the road. We've done it maybe 10 times. It's very desolate and spooky. You occasionally see headlights in the distance, and it's almost always Border Patrol doing their rounds. Every so often, you will see another car, undoubtedly looking for ghosts just like we would be. But this time, it was absolutely empty. You see familiar things there, evidence of a bonfire, empty beer cans, abandoned appliances, etc. The road is half paved, half sanded over, so you always hear the tires as you change from surface to surface. This time it seemed boring. Nothing was out there, just a stretch of nothingness. The second to last turn, my Jeep lost the back end a bit, so I understeer to straighten out, and as I did, the headlights focused on what we can only describe as a 7-foot owl with human-type legs and yellow eyes standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on my brakes, and the sand flew past us. We just sat there looking at this thing for what seemed like forever, but was maybe 45 seconds. It was taller than my car, a weird brown and black color, with white strikings on its chest. But it had human legs with knees and weirdly taloned feet. It had bright yellow eyes. Then, all of a sudden, it opened its wings and started to take off over our car, and it let out a very low and guttural screech as it flew over us. My friend and I just sat there, trying to figure out what the hell just happened. We've been out there so many times since, but never saw it again. 4. I had a strange experience in the winter of 2019. It was Christmas Eve, and I was doing what I do every Christmas Eve, after our family dinner, going for a solitary walk, reflecting on the year behind me and imagining the year ahead. I wasn't in the best mental space. My mother had been diagnosed with a malignant tumor in November. I walked south on a rural road outside the city limits. It might sound like a long trek, but it really isn't. I'm surrounded by fields after only 20 minutes. After I passed the halfway marker, a windmill wrapped in Christmas lights, the city lights fell away. The moon wasn't out, and the sky was filled with stars. 20 minutes beyond the windmill, my head started to get a very strange feeling, almost as if 1,000 microorganisms were messaging my brain, kneading the gray matter in an almost loving way. It felt like something was being both removed and added. I could hear a slow, deep, pulsing sound, and in a flash, I was looking at a completely different part of the night sky, as if something had been edited out of a movie. In the darkness of the road ahead, there was now a green glow. It was about my height, and the middle section was moving. The closer I got, the more it resembled a human form, and the middle part was a pair of arms beckoning me. This green glow started to resemble my mother, the same physical features, perhaps an idealized version, and I had a strong feeling that it was a completely different person or entity. The mouth opened, and instead of words, there was only the same pulsing sound that I was experiencing in my head. As the pulsing continued, the features of my mother began to swirl around like a tornado and stretch vertically. There was no sound except for the pulsing, which was becoming deeper and somehow merging with the pulsing in my brain. I fell on the ground and watched this entity stretch up to the sky with the arms now outspread. As it stretched, it arced and became thinner and thinner until it disappeared. When I finally arrived home, my family was sleeping. I didn't see my mother until a week later. I think it was on New Year's Day. She seemed uncharacteristically positive, talking about the year ahead and how she refused to allow the cancer to define or defeat her. I didn't tell her anything about what had happened on Christmas Eve, and I didn't think there was any connection. Weeks later, she did a series of routine blood tests, and the results came back normal. Her oncologist ordered an MRI and a CAT scan, and both showed no sign of the tumor from November. My mother has always attributed this to the power of positive thinking. My father thinks she had been misdiagnosed. I still hear the pulsing from time to time, and only at night. It scares me. Will I be revisited one day and forced to repay this gift? And do I think of it as a gift? From where? I have no idea. 5. I live on a 13-acre property in an area of my state where the suburbs turn to rural farmland. My parents live in the main house near our road, while my fiancé and I converted one of the barns on the back half of the property into our house. Our house and another barn are set in a pretty wide clearing and pasture, but beyond that, we're surrounded by woods on 3 sides. All this is to say, we don't get many visitors out here. From the time we moved into the house almost a year ago, there have been some occasions where I get this inexplicable feeling of terror while outside at night. I've lived in the woods my whole life, including in places far, far more remote than here, but I've never had this feeling. The woods are home. In every other place I've lived, they've felt like my woods. But not here. I've repeatedly had the feeling that I'm trespassing on someone else's land, someone who is not happy to have me here. The other night, I took my dog out for his last walk. It was around 11 p.m., so it was pitch black outside the ring of light cast by the floodlights on the side of the house. As I was walking towards the edge of the tree line where my pup likes to do his business, I heard a sound like someone imitating the hoot of an owl coming from the direction of the other barn about 30 yards away to our right. I was so certain that it was a human making the noise that I called out, "Ha ha, very funny, Dad." I assumed it was my father closing up the barn for the night, and he was taking the opportunity to try to spook me. No one called back. It was at this point that my dog lifted his head from sniffing all over and froze, staring in the direction of the barn. His hair stood up along his spine, and he started to give a low, menacing growl. Now, this dog is obsessed with all people and animals. Everyone is a friend waiting to be made. I've never seen him act aggressively toward anything, even other dogs who have tried to fight him. My dad especially is his favorite person on the planet, so there's no way he would have started growling at him. It was my turn for all the hair in my neck to stand up, as a cold wave of fear hit me like a brick. My dog had stopped right at the edge of where the light met the darkness of the woods. Normally, the light gradually dissipated into the trees, still providing enough visibility to see the outline of trees and shrubs, but this time it ended with a solid wall of black. Suddenly, I heard the same fake owl sound from only a few feet away, just on the other side of the darkness. My dog jumped and immediately started barking, putting himself between me and the sound. He's only a little guy, so I darted forward, scooped him up, and took off running toward the house. Behind me, I heard the sound again, but this time it had a strange warble to it, almost like laughter. The next morning, when I went out to check on the barn, I found the doors had been partially broken off the side and were swung past each other in the wrong direction, like someone had tried to force them open the wrong way. There were no signs of footprints in the sawdust or dirt, or any other signs of an intruder. I have no idea what was out there that night, but suffice to say, my dog and I stay well within the floodlights when we go out after dark now. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Paranormal Stories, episode 327. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Before you go, please do boop the like button and share the video with friends and family living and dead. Alright, as there's no other business today, we'll move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is, what is your favorite non-standard shape of cookie? As we all know, they traditionally come in round form. Sometimes they're square if you're feeling rebellious, but they also come in the shape of other things. I like the ones in the shape of people, like gingerbread men. But I don't think they all need to be gingerbread. They could be other things. Perhaps you have other, better, more interesting ideas? Please do let me know in a comment below. I mention that because the baking urge is on me yet again. It's always the way when you've decided to make more healthy choices in your life. Suddenly, all those things, those yummy, wonderful things you just can't have, you start wanting ravenously. So I tell myself, well, if I make them myself, there's going to be less junk in them, so it should be a little bit healthy overall, right? That makes perfect sense. So I'm thinking of baking scones. I'm looking to try them with non-gluten-y flours. Maybe try it with the rice flour or other things, and we'll see how they turn out. I know it's possible. I've just never done it. I've never actually made cookies, so it might be the time. And there was an old recipe my mother used to do, and this, well, I say old recipe, it was like a couple of decades ago, I think I last had them. And I'm sure many of you have tried it. It's Mars bar Rice Krispie treat. So you have 4 Mars bars, or if you're in the US, it's a different candy bar, because Mars bars are different, I believe. But basically, you've got your kind of like your nougat, your caramel, your chocolate. You melt them in with the butter, mix them into the Rice Krispies. They go in a container, then you put melted chocolate on top of that. And they're very, very yummy and very easy to make. So I think I might end up making those at some point, possibly this weekend as a treat. That'd be lovely. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.